Welcome to the ResponderStrong Mental Health Curriculum, brought to you by All Clear Foundation. All Clear Foundation is a national nonprofit that supports emergency responders and their family members in their overall well-being and longevity. Hi, we're back with our ResponderStrong Mental Health Curriculum module on resiliency. Brandon DeRuna and Craig Bettis are joining me, Rhonda Kelly, again for this session. So resiliency. All of us have heard the term. It's been kind of a hot button term for several years now. But what is it? We describe it as a responder's ability to survive, adapt, and grow from adverse events, thriving both off and on the job. We know far too many times in the past, responders have paid for their service with their lives in quality or longevity, bringing the stress and trauma home with themselves, oftentimes without recognizing it, but increasing their personal suffering and oftentimes inflicting unnecessary suffering on their families unintentionally. But we know that most of the trauma and stress that captures responders, that really catches up to them, isn't the single headline grabbing event. It is that accumulation of small t trauma and small s stressors over a course of a career. And they only accumulate when we're unable to deal with them effectively, when we're unable to cope with them in the moment. The good news about this is, even though these resiliency practices we're about to discuss with you are seemingly small when looked at in their own right, when they are made habits and daily practices, their benefit accumulates over time, offsetting the accumulation of stress and trauma during a career. Resiliency is really the secret sauce. This is how we increase our coping mechanisms to be prepared for what we encounter in the workplace.
Imagine leaving your house with your phone battery at 5%. Because that's what we do on a regular basis in our careers. Without caring for ourselves and making sure that our tank is full, we're wading into these traumatic situations unprepared. So I wouldn't leave my house unless my battery was like at least at 60%, but I want to be at 100%. That way I can deal with anything that the day brings. This is the same concept for you as an individual. These practices will help elevate your tolerance for the traumatic events that you experience and thereby reduce the potential risk.
So we try to think about resiliency in the form of a lot of what we do. Sometimes, we're in the place of being reactive, but we always practice prevention when possible. This is no different. Resilient behavior is a form of prevention in and of itself. And the tools we're going to talk about, some of the things we're going to go into depth about, is that form of prevention. When practiced routinely, made habits, as Rhonda said, are really is what's going to prevent a lot of these small t's and small s's from occurring.
All of our professions have traditionally really embraced preventive training. We're taught to look for the hazards, particularly the physical hazards, and to mitigate those from the outset. Unfortunately, when we look at responders' careers, it's the psychological threats that tend to get them more frequently than the physical. And we have been remiss in the past in teaching people how to adequately prepare themselves, how to get the proactive, preventive training and skill set to allow them to work in this environment without suffering negative impacts. But we are changing. I love the quote from Maya Angelou, when we know better, we do better, and I think we're very much there. Interestingly enough, we've touched on some of the benefits to come out of the whole COVID debacle. One of them that I see is that we are now probably a decade ahead of where I thought we would be in regards to normalization of the human impacts of the work and destigmatization of it. We are finding the responders are far more open to acknowledging the mental and emotional impacts of the job and to reaching out for help, recognizing that they want to maintain a high quality of life while also serving their community.
To a certain extent, it's generational too. So COVID's been a big mover of the culture, but if you talk to anybody under the age of 25, these sort of conversations are completely normalized, and their willingness to sort of share their mental anguish and challenges in their lives is like nothing compared to what it was 20 years ago, when this would not be a conversation you'd ever hear. So whether you like it or not, your organizations are going to be pushed into being having a cultural shift from the recognition of this challenge.
Neuroplasticity. It used to be believed that our brains fully formed around the age of 25, and after that it was all downhill. Thankfully, we have learned that is not the case.
Now it's 50.
And the sudden drop off the cliff. We all have neuroplasticity, the ability to reshape and to strengthen neural pathways. And we do this through repetition. Everybody is resilient on some level, and we all have the capacity to develop it further. And one of our biggest assets in that is our brain and how we choose to use it, whether we choose to ruminate, to resist change, to be negative, or if we use it to be positive, to look for opportunities, for potentials to grow in any situation, and if we look for new and novel ways to do things.
We talked earlier about the amygdala hijack, or your inability to control your reaction. Well, it turns out if you practice response, your brain will actually reconstruct the pathways between your amygdala and your prefrontal cortex, and you will be better at hearing a stimulus and responding instead of reacting.
Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist in Austria. He and his family were rounded up at the beginning of World War II and sent to concentration camps. This is a man who lost everything. His parents, his wife, his brother died in the concentration camps. He had been working on a dissertation in regards to mindset, interestingly enough. He didn't know what was happening when he was arrested, and he tucked his life's work in his pocket. It was burned in front of him when he was brought into Auschwitz. He was there for 5 years, and during this time, he really evolved the theory of what became existentialism. The basis of existentialism is that life does not have its own inherent meaning and purpose. It's up to each one of us to determine our own. And when the conditions or circumstances of our life challenge what was priorly our meaning and purpose, it is up to us to recreate a new one, to grow rather than to give up, because the loss of hope is usually the last step before death, whether it comes in suicide or other form. The other big takeaway from his book, in particular, Man's Search for Meaning, is that everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And that speaks very much to what Brandon just said about neuroplasticity and the ability to respond to our environment rather than react. And remember, Viktor Frankl didn't come up with this while sitting in a cozy armchair smoking a pipe. He was in Auschwitz, one of the worst possible places for human experience. And in those experiences, he walked away with this message. He didn't give up hope. He chose the way that he viewed things. He chose his attitude about it.
He in fact said that he was the freest person in Auschwitz because he had the ability to control his response.
Yeah, I love this. Apocalyptic optimist. Somebody who knows it's all going to ship, but still thinks it's going to turn out okay. And ironically, this attitude is one of the biggest resilience tools. It's optimism, but it's not put your head in the sand, Pollyanna-ish, everything's all sunshine and roses. It is strategic reframing. It's recognizing this is what it is, and this is what I can make of this. This is a good outcome that can come from this. So it's really being nimble and flexible in your thought, which you can't do when you're highly stressed. You're in that reactive, lower level brain. When you have a healthy brain, you can really look at every challenge as an opportunity. And
I think it's incumbent upon all of us in the first responder world to seek out those positive things. Sometimes they're hard to come by in our profession. And it's like Rhonda mentioned earlier, we're not taking 911 calls to be invited to birthday parties, but there are so many things in our daily job that we can find to be optimistic, that we can find to be positive, but sometimes we actually have to make the effort and seek those out and redefine what that might look like for each of us.
The Dalai Lama said that we should thank the person that's annoying to us because they gave us an opportunity to practice tolerance. So, an old school way of looking at that would be, man, this person's so frustrating, I'm so angry that I have to be here, and this negativity and reinforcing and intrusive thoughts. But we can reframe that situation and we can say, this person's giving me an opportunity to practice something that I don't often get to practice, and I'm going to be better for it at the end of this experience. And the shift that occurs in my perception of that situation is really beneficial to me and me alone.
Well, and that can be a really interesting mindset to adapt or to adopt. But interestingly enough, we all know we don't grow from a place of complacency, and these jobs are really a gift. We have meaning and purpose. Most of us get into this work to help others. It's what we experience after that. And to Craig's point, we can look at things as an opportunity to grow or to practice. To Brandon's point about the Dalai Lama's point, these careers, they are rife with plenty of opportunities for growth, whether or not we appreciate them in the moment. But this provides great challenges. It can also provide great opportunities for us and greater fulfillment when We take care of our batteries. When we're not letting ourselves get run down to the red lightning bolt, we're not getting down to 5%, we're keeping our charge up, and we're really nimble and responsive. We're able to handle the challenges that are coming. Gratitude. We've all heard of gratitude as a resilience practice. And most of the research in the past talked about noticing. We have that negativity bias we've talked about. So gratitude can be very beneficial when we take 3 or 5 or 10 things and we write them down every day. I'm grateful for this, I'm grateful for that. It goes back to neuroplasticity. It's training our brain to, instead of always looking for the negative, also appreciate the positive. It doesn't make you unsafe. It doesn't make you vulnerable because you're still aware of the negative. It's just not your primary focus. And when we focus on the negative, we exclude all of the positive things. So gratitude, noticing, and awareness helps us change what we notice in our environment, which is fantastic. But a lot of the recent research says the biggest bang for our buck with regards to gratitude is receiving it. And this is where I think responders in our culture have really fallen down, in that how many times has somebody sincerely said to you, hey, thank you. I really appreciate that you did that. You saved my son's life. Oh my gosh, you saved my house. We really appreciate you being here when we've lost everything in the tornado. And what's the reflective responder response?
Yeah, it's my job.
It's my job.
Yep. I'm trained to do it. Yeah, it's no big deal.
Exactly. Don't mention it, no big deal. I'm just doing my job. We tell ourselves that that's being humble. We tell ourselves that's being professional. But really what it's doing, it is us deflecting gratitude, receiving gratitude, which is really one of the things that can recharge our battery. And it's us robbing the other person of the opportunity to express their gratitude. So we took what could have been an amazingly mutually restorative interaction and made it awful for both of us, or made it not as positive as it could have been.
And some of those practices, like you said, I fondly, still to this day, have kind of a box that I have that were the favorite things I've received over my career have been some of those subtle thank yous, things like that. But they're constant reminders or pieces of legacy for me to pull out and use that one feeling, that I appreciate that gratitude. But giving it as well, like you said, is just as big a deal. And Rhonda highlighted on this, writing some things down. Journaling has proven to be such an effective tool in building resiliency and be able to write things down. Some people, that actual writing of words and letters is the way they transpose that into the feeling. So it's such an important piece, whether you're lettering somebody for a piece of gratitude or you're writing it down to recognize some of the things you're thankful for every day, is a great way to start reframing your optimism.
Here's a homework assignment. Keep a gratitude log. So you get up in the morning, you pull out your gratitude log, you write 2 or 3 things that you want to accomplish during the day. And then at night before you go to bed, you write 2 or 3 things that you're grateful for. And you keep that log. You just, every day you do that. And it allows you to sort of journal and to engage that process of understanding where you are in your life. But the best part about it is when you're really challenged and you're having a tough time, you have this entire book of all the things you've accomplished and everything you're grateful for. And you can ruminate on those things. Instead of having those intrusive thoughts about what's challenging, you can go back and you can see the history of your accomplishment.
One of the great things that practices like that do is it helps us maintain perspective. It's easy to get down on ourselves, it's easy to get negative and to lose sight of the positive in our lives, but referring to something like that helps us put everything back in context.
Oh yeah, this is good. You should move around.
Yeah, physical activity. We'll talk a little bit about eat, move, and sleep are kind of the pillars for our overall well-being, but physical activity is almost unparalleled, well, except by sleep, in really maintaining resilience. One of the great ways to do physical activity is to combine it with other resilience building skills. In this case, with this photo, social. It can be a great way to connect with other people, to push each other, to maintain positive social connections. Being outdoors in nature, if you're hiking, skiing, snowshoeing, mountain biking, surfing, whatever it is you love to do, getting physical activity in nature just is a force multiplier in terms of resilience, managing your stress and anxiety.
Well, it also turns out, there's physiology here. You're bathing in all these stress hormones from all of this chronic stress that you have, but you're not getting the physical activity that, the tiger scenario describes. This is an artificial way of burning a lot of that stress hormone off. And really allows you to sort of utilize the physiologic stress that you otherwise wouldn't because you're sitting at a desk or you're in a scenario where you don't use your body.
and yes, this particular scenario, great. Whether you're in the gym, the more physical activity, probably the more stress you'll release to a point. But the reality is it doesn't have to be much. To Rhonda's point, a walk in nature, meaning a park for a few minutes, just a brisk walk, anything like that can suffice for what we're talking about and releasing some of that. But getting out in nature is shown, changes our environment. We're able to let things in more, acknowledge what's going on because we don't have these other stressors that are in some of our urban environments. So don't feel like you have to go to the gym or join a class or jump on a Peloton. Sometimes it could just be stepping away and taking a walking lunch, getting yourself outside and breathing some fresh air.
And to that point, physical activity also encompasses stretching, yoga, modalities like that. We talked about chronic elevation of stress hormones and activation of the sympathetic nervous system lead to increased muscle tension, which in the short term is supposed to help us with that fight or flight response. In the long term, it leads to chronic pain. And I think we've all got our own area. Some people it's low back and hips, some people it's neck and shoulders, where we get that chronic pain. Doing stretches is physical activity, but it also provides feedback to your brain. When your muscles are tight, they send a signal to your brain that there's danger, we're stressed. And your brain then in turn amplifies the stress response, tightening your muscles. When you stretch, it can cause your muscles to send a signal to your brain saying everything's okay, you can relax. Stretching is a great thing to do before bed to help you move into a more restorative or calm state. It's also good for over time to better manage your muscular response to stress.
Yeah, this is a really challenging one. So we were just talking about this before we started today, and I teach this class to about 120 law enforcement leaders every year, and we've had some really interesting comments about this lately. And one of them, I mean, we have all these sort of historic bumper talk and fire department dinner table, all these historic ways that we've been able to build social support at work and have the gallows humor or the commiserating conversations to help us, build some camaraderie and decompress. But we're moving into this new age of technology where some of the things that we have every day are making it difficult for us to be successful here. One of them is body-worn cameras. So an example of a conversation that some officers might have after a challenging situation could be limited by the fact that they're all on camera or there's bystanders that are recording them and they don't feel comfortable sharing the way they feel. The other is just our phones. We're constantly in our phones. We have connections to all these people all over the world all the time in our phones, and we lose sight of what's right in front of us. We had a fire captain that commented 20 years ago, everybody would share this meal every night and they would commiserate and make fun of each other and have a great time. And now they get their food and they all go to their separate bedrooms and they're on their phones. So this is really, really important for us, and we're challenged in our modern society because it is becoming less and less likely to have these interactions.
Unless we intentionally create those situations or those opportunities. It used to be that this was built into our culture and our workplace, and now we just have to be aware that we're missing it and create situations that allow it again. Sleep, move, and eat.
Yeah, so the first one we're going to kind of talk about, and we're going to go into a little detail of each of these, although I think we've already had the opportunity to talk about movement in its form of physical energy, releasing that energy, whether it's exercise, whether it's taking that walk, whatever it may be, but the ability to move. Rhonda, stressing upon flexibility. Excuse me. The flexibility component is such a big deal. There's a reason that in the first responder community, it doesn't matter what city, what county, what state you're in, that almost 50% of claims that get entered into a city for disability or injury are around knees, backs, and shoulders. Our job demands a lot from us, and it's not just the ability to have some strength at times, but more so the ability to be flexible. We have to react to things very quickly and oftentimes from a sedentary position. And because of that, we put undue biomechanical stress on our bodies. And that's where we see these injury mechanisms occur. So practicing some form of flexibility along with strength training or cardio training is good, but most of the times we're leaving that out. Stretching is difficult to do on your own, but there's guided stretching, there's yoga, or us in law enforcement like to call it tactical stretching. Whatever it may be, find a way to incorporate that into your movement piece. I know Brandon's going to touch a little bit on this too, but sleep. Again, I'm big on kind of talking about some numbers, but it's estimated that 45% of first responders have a diagnosed sleep disorder. 50% of law enforcement are reported falling asleep at the wheel. This has a lot to do with just not our oscillating shift patterns, consistent tiredness, especially around long patterns of shift work, where we might be working 12 hours and then coming back the next day and doing another 12-hour shift. But especially around night shift, or what we call graveyard, we know it's difficult for us to enter a sleep, an appropriate sleep, as Brandon mentioned, around REM sleep during the daytime. And for those of us that go home and have families and lives where those are normal hours for those people to be up, it's even more difficult for us to create a work or a sleep environment that we can get good quality sleep in. And we have to really work on that. So when we talk about putting efforts around our sleep, it's routines, it's taking away blue light, making a room that is susceptible for us to get true sleep and not a lot of noise or interruptions, so we can spend that time in that mode. What are some other things about sleep that we wanted to touch on?
Oh, if I can jump in here. We've talked a lot about chronic elevation of stress hormones and nervous system activation, creating a state of hypervigilance. So when Craig talks about creating an environment that is conducive to sleep, good quality sleep, one is keeping the room cool. Research shows that we sleep best at about 64 to 68 degrees. Whether you're sleeping in a basement, you've got your window open, whatever, make the room cooler. Another thing is, because we're in that hypervigilant state and because of our responsiveness on the job, our brains are trained to listen for alerts, for tones, for alarms, and our eyes are trained to look for flashing lights, for some indication, visual indication of danger or response. So you want to really create an environment where you are overriding. You can put your brain into a state of calm. Lots of times that's by making it very quiet, either having a white noise machine, wearing earplugs, sleeping in a quiet location, or room darkening blinds, little face masks. They look funny, but we all know our eyelids are not light proof. We've all had the experience, I'm sure, of napping somewhere, somebody comes in and flips on a light switch, even though you're asleep and your eyes are closed, you're still aware that there's a light on. Eliminate those potential triggers for your brain. If your brain picks up on noises or on light, it will pull you out of that deep restful state and bring you into a shallower state of sleep. Other things that you can do: avoid eating excessively for a couple hours before bed, about 2 hours. Avoid alcohol for at least 2 hours before going to bed. And cell phones. Oh, yes, blue light. Do a digital sunset. So for an hour or two before you go to bed, don't look at bright lights. Don't be reading your phone in bed. If you're having a hard time sleeping, get up and go do something. Don't look at your phone. Don't look at a television screen. And a lot of the research has really shown it is about whether it's blue light shifted, but even bright yellow shifted light will still interfere with your melatonin. There's science behind it. That's why it interferes with your sleep. So those are some things you can really do. Stretching before bed to calm your body down, calm your nervous system down is fantastic. And as hard as it is with shift work, trying to establish a regular sleep routine. When you can, go to sleep at the same time, wake up at the same time as much as you can, your body starts to fall into a rhythm. One other last big thing, take naps. If you don't get the sleep on shift or at home that you really need, a nap can be amazing during the day. Don't take it too close to going to bed or you might keep yourself up. But a nap can really restore some of that debt.
In lines with the napping, find out what your organizational policies are. I know in the fire and the EMS world, it's disrupted sleep. When they get an alarm call, but they're allowed to sleep when possible. And research has shown 20 minutes of REM sleep is like getting, restoring for 2 hours, right? So the more time you can get there. But find out what your department policies are, even in the law enforcement sector. If there's break rooms and you can come off the radio for a bit, it's much better that you can take those 20 or 30 minutes and try to get some restful sleep just for a short period of time that will not only make you safer out there, but the community safer. So do your research on your policies and find out what you have.
I would also suggest, we talked a lot about sleeping at home. For those of you that are on 24 and 48-hour shifts, sleeping at work is a huge challenge. We know that you're just not getting restorative sleep when you're at work. Some of the things that you can do, so the station alerting system, so some of the new technologies that are isolating just you in your bedroom so you're not hearing the whole system all the time, and you're not waking up to lights on, blaring tones, but instead you're having something that elevates you from sleep a little bit better. The other is caffeine, and I would specifically call out energy drinks. A lot of people drink energy drinks as a result of not getting enough rest. Remember that caffeine has a 12-hour half-life. So if you have an energy drink at noon, half of that caffeine effect is still coursing through your veins at midnight. So be very conscientious about when you're drinking caffeine and other taurine and other energy drink stimulants, caffeine or nicotine as well, and then how that relates to when you're trying to go to sleep. You should have a moratorium on drinking that stuff within 12 hours of when you want to go to sleep.
And this goes out to all the first responders, and you know who you are. The ones that continue to work on graveyard shifts or night shifts, if given the choice. Understanding why it can be, you're removed from administration, it's more exciting, but the reality in research shown, if your department doesn't force you to rotate your shifts at least to one day shift pattern, please, we implore you to do so. Reset yourself. Remember what it's like to be around people during the daytime. It's a different experience, but it's so important for you to do so in disrupting some of that ongoing graveyard night shift, because it's detrimental to health.
So we've talked a lot about sleep, we've talked about move. Looping back on move, there's some really interesting research with regards to depression and anxiety in particular. We'll talk about some of the breath work things we can practice. We've touched on yoga and physical fitness, but what the research is showing is that there are areas in the cortex of our brain that correspond to motor, particularly the core muscles of the body, and that respond to touch, that have a direct impact on our adrenal system. So it decreases the release of stress hormones. The core muscles, whether it's yoga, Pilates, breath work, anything that really engages, have a pronounced effect on decreasing the adrenal hormones and decreasing the stress response. Touch, someone touching your arm, havening, which is a practice like this that's for calming, that's what they're finding is there's an area in the cortical brain that responds to positive, pleasurable touch that decreases the secretion of adrenaline and other stress hormones. So there is a lot of science backing these things. We know that were good for us. Now we're starting to understand why. But eat, that's all you.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to take a second and talk about what I really feel is a big part, if not the crux of some of the problem we're seeing, but also as a direct result of the job. A lot of what we eat or what we consider in our nutritional diet, exercise or routine, whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to talk to you about kind of how we've gotten to a place and possibly have you rethink about what you should be putting in your body when really thinking how it can help you in your performance of the job, and some of the reasons we tend to have the wrong choices around the first responder community. So it's estimated that in the first responder community, 40 to 50% are obese, and more like 60 to 80% are overweight. And this is a really high number. Now, I think we're all aware it's not because we're gluttonous in nature. It's not because we tend to always say, okay, I can't drive past a fast food restaurant and not eat. The reality is this obesity rate and overweight concern that we're seeing amongst first responders has a lot to do with what we just talked about. Lack of sleep, obviously lack of movement, but we tend to pick things in our diet and nutritional profile that offset the patterns of tiredness. When we're working in these shift patterns, long periods of time, not getting enough sleep because we're trying to sleep during the day, what we tend to see is we choose foods that are very dependent and mostly made up of carbs. And carbs, what we know, it's a form of fuel source, but it's ineffective for long-term fuel source. It's more of an octane boost than it is a long-term sustainable fuel source. But we reach for carbs. Why? Because they're available at 2 in the morning when you're driving past something that's only like a 7-Eleven. They're cheap, they don't have to be refrigerated, and most of the times they're coming in forms, as Brandon mentioned earlier, in forms of energy drinks. They're kind of catered towards our industry. It's very rare that I can walk into a fire station or a briefing room and not see an energy drink at some component. But we're drinking that drink, as Brandon mentioned, for this stimulant, this effect, because we're in this state of tiredness. What we don't realize is actually those things we're consuming, which are primarily carb dependent, are forms of sugar, and they have side effects to that. Because the reality is we don't know how many carbs we're supposed to eat. So we eat till we're full. And the circumstance of that is that unused carbs, those unburned carbs become adipose tissue. And they get stored in places we don't want them. And every year we creep up a couple more pounds, a few more pounds, and we're starting to put weight on, which is how we see this number increase and increase. So when we think about it as simplicity, there's only a few things that our body metabolizes, and that's either fat, it gets broken down into fat as fuel sources, or carbs. And the human body is an amazing thing. It can run off of diesel and gasoline. Either one of these will work. What you put in the tank will be its primary source for fuel burning. What we know is when we talk about BMR, which is a basal metabolic rate, that's the rate at which you would burn calories if you were to do very little. Sleep for 24 hours, sit for 24 hours. Because we spend a lot of our time in a sedentary lifestyle, this is what really feeds this mechanism. But we know that we're what? Probably 70% dependent as our diet on carbs. And we know that when this carb cycle becomes our fuel cycle, and we kind of start this mechanism, that these unused carbs get stored in what we call adipose tissue, fat on the body, places we don't want it. And every year that adipose tissue grows and grows. And this is the mechanism for weight gain. But again, the choice for carbs is based around tiredness, sugar, things that we think are going to increase our energy status. But what we know about carbs, it really is an inefficient fuel source for sustaining energy. Now we talk about fat. When I talk about fat, I mean healthy fat. Fats that come in forms of oil, avocados, nuts, lean meats, fish, certain type, poultry, things like that. These we know have 50,000 times the energy and 3 times the muscle strength. And we think that we need strength during our job. But more importantly, we need sustained energy. So we don't have this pattern of tiredness where we get tired, we drink a sugar or we eat a carb, and all of a sudden we get a spike and then we go back down. And this is kind of how we do. It's this roller coaster effect in our day-to-day life. And we're consistently reaching for things that just keep that pattern in check. Well, if we were to swap this mindset and start really looking at more foods around healthy fat, the things I mentioned, and make this more like 70% of our diet, what we'd see is longer patterns of normalness around our tiredness, where it wouldn't be that way. It would look more like a straight line, and we'd have more energy and strength throughout the day to perform our job. And the best part about this as we wrap up is when we run out of fat that we're putting in our body to burn, when we run out, the body goes to the same compound out of the adipose tissue and puts it into the burn cycle. This is the very mechanism for weight loss. This is the very mechanism for weight gain, which explains how we get here. So when we talk about it in relation to sleeping, moving, and eating, it's so important to understand that all of these things have an effect on this. And the reality is what we put in our body is going to determine how much sleep we need, how we're sleeping, and then the movement and the ability for us to do the physical activity all has to do with this too. So we're not talking about diets and anything. We're just talking about getting more healthy fats in your body so your metabolism can learn to train and use that as its primary fuel source. And that's focusing on healthy eating.
So that's fantastic what Craig just showed us. And we have been talking throughout this series about performance, our own personal performance. In order to perform the way we want to, we have to give ourselves high octane fuel, high quality fuel. We know that everybody has their own dietary preferences, whether you're vegan, keto, carnivore, however. Any of the nutritional philosophies out there, they have one thing in common. It's eliminate processed foods or diminish them as much as possible. And far too often, due to our shift schedule, our fatigue, missed meals, our depleted energy, like Brandon's battery analogy, we reach for the convenience foods that are there, prepackaged chips, cookies, crackers, the dreaded energy drinks. Being more conscious of that and making consistent, healthy fuel choices for our body day to day, whether we're on duty or not, gives us more of that range, that cushion, that buffer so that we can manage the tough shifts, the time in between meals, and sustain that energy like Craig demonstrated for us. Mindfulness.
Yeah, should we do, so we want to do a little bit of an exercise. I imagine you guys are sitting, maybe in small groups or by yourself at your computer. So we want to do a little bit of a breathing exercise. But what I want you to do first, I want you to grab a pen, get a little scrap of paper, and I want you to, on a 10 scale, I want you to rate 3 things. Think about how you feel right now, and I want you to rate how energized or tired you feel. So I'm from a scale of 10 being really energized and 1 being really tired. I want you to rate your anxiety, and I want you to rate your happiness. So 10 being really happy, 10 being really anxious. So just real quick, write down those 3 numbers, and then come back and we're going to do a little bit of a breathing exercise. So the goal here is for you to just spend 5 minutes breathing. We're going to just give you this as a tool. Part of this program is to make you aware of some of the challenges we face, but also give you some actionable things you can do. So I want you to get comfortable in your chair. If you're in an environment that's really hectic, try to remove yourself as much as is possible. You can pause this and maybe go to another room. But get comfortable in your chair, lean back, put your arms down. If you feel comfortable closing your eyes, close your eyes. And just become as relaxed as you can. So the goal here is going to be to breathe for 5 minutes, and we're going to concentrate on a point that makes us feel happy. So that can be whatever that is for you. It can be a place, it can be a person, it can be a particular state of mind or sport, whatever you think about that really brings joy. I want you to concentrate on that point. What you're going to notice is, as we're doing this over the next 5 minutes, you're going to have intrusive thoughts. You might think about how you have to pick somebody up from school later, you might think of something that's going on at work. Those things are completely fine. There's nothing wrong with having intrusive thoughts, but what we're going to do is we're going to acknowledge the thought. We're going to say to ourselves, okay, yep, I know that exists, and I'm going to have to do that later. And then you're going to return back to your point. So you're going to come right back to where that point that makes you feel happy. And as you're doing that, I want you to breathe deeply. I want to put one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly, and I want you to breathe in deeply for 5 seconds. I want you to hold your breath for 5 seconds, and then I want you to breathe out for 5 seconds. And just notice the pattern of your breathing and concentrate on your spot. I'm going to stop talking so that you can start doing that. We're going to time it. Please do that for 5 minutes, and we'll come back together. Okay. So I hope that wasn't too loud to scare you out of your breathing. But I wonder how you feel now. So just that 5-minute time is enough to sort of recenter yourself. What I would like you to do now is rate yourself again on those 10 scales in your feeling of tiredness, your anxiety, and your happiness. And my hope is that 5 minutes has significantly changed your assessment of yourself. What we know is just taking these brief moments where you center yourself, concentrate on something that makes you happy, and breathe can do a lot to reduce your cortisol and make you feel more relaxed and calm. And it's something that's really consumable and easy to do during your day. So you can very easily excuse yourself from a situation, go to your office, close the door, or maybe if you're in an ambulance or a fire truck or a police vehicle, you can find a little parking space of solace, and you can spend 5 minutes recentering yourself. We know that this significantly affects the anxiety and cortisol that is in your body, and our goal here is to build sort of regular practices that give you an opportunity to expend some of that energy.
Fantastic. Love that exercise from Brandon, and that is a great way to introduce breathing practices into your daily habits and the patterns of your day. Another great way to integrate breath work is to integrate it on the fly throughout your day, where you don't need to step out of a situation. You can practice self-regulation and calming in the moment. One of my favorites comes from Andrew Huberman. If you haven't followed his research out of Stanford, he's amazing. He has podcasts, website, all the things. But he teaches physiologic sigh. And if you're a firefighter, you were probably taught this in academy, but it was called skip breathing. I remember being taught in academy that if you were trapped in a building, your SCBA was running low, and your heads-up display is flashing red lights in your eyes because that's really effective at calming you down. How can you conserve your air supply until rescue comes? What they taught us is this physiologic sigh. You take an inhale through your nose, followed by a second inhale on top of it, and then a slow, prolonged exhale through your mouth. As little as 3 cycles of this has been demonstrated to significantly reduce heart rate, and blood pressure. It is a direct pathway to your nervous system. You can do this when you're sitting in the rig. You can do this when you are at the break station, at the nurse's desk. You can do this while you're in your tent if you're deployed for wildland. I mean, there is no end to the places you can do this, and you can do it while other people are around and engaging with you, and they don't even have to know it. 3 cycles. Inhale through your nose. Second inhale, really filling up your chest. You don't have to exaggerate it like that. And then slow, prolonged exhale through your mouth. Tremendous positive benefits. So breath work is an amazing way. We talked about the cortical area of the brain where core muscle activation, integration with the diaphragm really is a direct line to your adrenal system. This can have tremendous benefits in the moment and long term when practiced regularly.
I was just doing it too. I don't know if you guys noticed, but while the whole time she was talking, I was doing it. I don't think you could tell. So it's something that you can literally do in any scenario. You can be the best man in somebody's wedding and doing that, and nobody will know.
So mindfulness. Breath work is one form of mindfulness, but there are a ton of other ways. You don't need yoga pants, you don't need incense. You can integrate it on the fly in your life. Meditation is a big one. Brandon talked a lot about that with his breath exercise. Meditation's basically an internal scene size up, situational awareness inside. Just checking in with yourself and experiencing it in a non-judgmental way. Not projecting into the future, not ruminating about the past, just allowing thoughts to flow through like it's a breeze through a screen door.
Yeah, I mean, mindfulness is about being present and excluding all of the other complexity and interruptions that exist in our lives. And it's powerful for our own personal mental health and welfare. It's also powerful as a leadership and communication tool. So imagine that leader or that mentor you've had in your career, and the phrase that everybody said about them was, man, when I'm in the room with this person, I feel like I'm the only person there with them. That's because they are present. Right? That's because they are not they don't have external stimulus from their phone. They're not thinking about other things. They're not checking their emails. They're there one-on-one with you. And that's the practice of mindfulness. You can do that both when interacting with an individual, but you can also do it just with yourself. And the ability to sort of get into a Zen state and just be present and concentrating on the moment at hand and not trying to multitask and not worrying about all of the things that have happened before or after is really a healing and restorative way of engaging the world every day.
Meditation can also be done moving. I hear so many responders say, I just can't sit still, I can't do nothing. You don't have to. Just being present, like Brandon talked about. You can be mindful, you can be meditating while you're doing anything rhythmic. The rowing machine, biking, going for a walk, painting, gardening, anything where you are present in the moment can be a moving meditation. Just being aware of where you are and what you're doing and not getting attached to any of your thoughts.
And if you know in your career or prior to your career you had certain hobbies that you really enjoyed, seek those out again if you're no longer doing them. Ask yourself why they're no longer part of your life and put those back into practice. We also, we mentioned already the journaling aspect and the benefits of that. Time in nature, we kind of talked about that as well, and the benefits surrounding that. Listening to music or podcasts, I think you just mentioned, is a huge thing. We have all this opportunity, especially if we're in vehicles or you're driving around alone, where maybe you can put on your own music that you find soothing, whatever it may be. But the opportunity sometimes is shifted towards a podcast, so there's some thought in that, and that flow is a really great benefit as well. And obviously reading, can't say enough about that.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Any sort of Zen-like activity that is so stimulating that it excludes everything else. Whatever that is for you. I think we're in Colorado, so people are skiers and bikers and fly fishermen and all those sorts of things. Any experience where you're so concentrated on that experience that you don't have the ability to have this sort of external thought is what we're talking about. It doesn't have to be cross-legged on a mat in a dark room humming. It can be all kinds of different experiences that allow you to be present in that moment.
Well, and I know so many responders who reach flow state or a meditative state while doing things like hunting, fishing, target shooting, something that they enjoy and that just engages all of their attention. So the mind isn't wandering, the little negative voice inside isn't chirping in their ear. Craig's point, music, podcasts. It's not only about what we add into our life around mindfulness, it's about what we push out and we don't leave space for anymore. So if you find that when you're commuting to work, you're dreading what you're going into, you're thinking negative things, you're ruminating, or as you're driving home, you're thinking about the shift and you're thinking about how tired you are. Fill those spaces up with more positive things. Music you really enjoy, don't go for news, podcasts, things that feed your brain positive fuel and leave less space for the negative.
Growth is actually a big part of this too. So, the great thing about a lot of these hobbies is that they are challenging. And so you can actually dedicate yourself to learning how to do something and see your own personal growth through that experience, which is also a huge benefit.
One thing that's shown to have great benefits, which is not as easy to come by, but I feel it's important to mention. We've talked around that we have a tendency to suffer inflammation. Inflammation brought on by stress, inflammation brought on by other things that we might have happen in our career. And one thing that's proven to be extremely effective, although not easy to do as some of these other things like grabbing a journal or practicing breathing, but is around contrast therapy. Do some research around that for yourself. Wim Hof is kind of the guy who put the pin on the map for this, but the reality of going from hot to cold in those environments in certain sequences has a great deal of benefit towards inflammation, autoimmune, and anxiety.
Awesome. All right, so we've talked a lot about our internal voice, and honestly, that's the voice we hear most in our life, and one that can have the most positive impact on us or the most negative. The stories we tell ourselves are really what trigger our stress reaction. It is not nearly as much about what happens externally as the story we tell ourselves about it. So one of the mind changes, the mindset shifts we can do is to become more curious instead of judgmental. When we are highly stressed, we get reactive and hypervigilant. We go towards anger. We go towards making assumptions that are usually not favorable of other people. And when we create the space to be curious, I wonder why you did that. Not only do we take the conflict out of our relationships, but we don't trigger our stress reaction internally. We're not getting ourselves all amped up by the story we're telling ourselves. He or she always does that. This always happens to me. This is crap. This never changes. That just ramps us up inside. When we can be curious, one, that pulls us back up into our executive functioning center of our prefrontal cortex, and two, it doesn't trigger our nervous system, and three, we're probably going to learn something then and have the opportunity to build connection rather than conflict. And that's for ourselves and for others.
And something goes in line with this, which I think is a great tool for resiliency. And it has putting aside personal beliefs, values, where you park your political car. The reality is in this job, we don't have the choice, but having multicultural flexibility and understanding that we're going to deal with all types of people in all sectors of life and faith and belief, race, gender, whatever it may be, but having the flexibility to just recognize that they're a human being, this is a human problem, and that it's our job to address it and not have that rigidity around it can make this job a lot easier and less stressful upon you. We have a tendency to live in echo chambers where we get all our information and we only subscribe to one newsletter, whatever it may be, and that makes it more difficult for us when we have to put on that role or that badge or that patch and go out there and serve a community that's made up of so many different people. So think about that when you think about having or providing multiple cultural flexibility.
I think of, this is going to be weird, I think of judgment like I think of alcohol. Judgment is a very short-term route to us feeling comfortable in situations that are really, really challenging. So we build these insulating structures where we judge other people to make us feel safer and happier when we're experiencing really kind of traumatic situations, right? So my mantra professionally is care without judgment. Because what the downside of judgment is as we build these models that the people that are befalling challenging situations aren't like me, they're different, they made bad choices, they're in bad scenarios, that would never happen to me. We build this progression so that when we see that person in the mirror because we are facing a really challenging situation, we don't recognize them. Because we have distanced ourselves from the humanity of the people that we are dealing with on a daily basis. Judgment is toxic. So to the extent that you can move yourself away from judgment and towards curiosity, you can significantly improve your ability to manage these stressful situations.
Which brings up the stressed mind again. The more stressed we are, the more rigid we are in our thinking, the more binary, black and white, right or wrong. And it makes it really difficult to be curious. So pulling ourselves consciously back into a state of curiosity and openness and self-reflection is another way to help mitigate that stress response. So I love the way Brandon described earlier that this can be a self-perpetuating cycle. We can get into this downward spiral of stress, injury, and negative sequela. When we recognize any of these things, wow, I'm really flying off the handle, I'm being really judgmental, this isn't me, let me consciously make these changes, we can start to bring ourselves back up the spiral.
Oh man. So, the beginner's mind is this really amazing place, and engaging situations with curiosity and recognizing that, you don't, like we talked about before, we all see the world through the lens of our previous experiences. You don't know what the previous experiences of the people that you're dealing with may be. And so trying to understand where they're coming from as an outsider from the beginning is an incredibly important way to open up possibilities and creativity. We always think about how children learn. They don't learn the way adults learn. They learn as beginners. So they learn through play. Imagine if you saw a 1-year-old stand up and start to toddle and fall down and then say, this isn't really for me. That was hard and I wasn't successful at that, so I'm just going to give up. No, they continue to try as not understanding the challenges that exist. They continue to try until they are successful. This is the way we have to engage the world every day. Engage the world as a curious beginner with a childlike attitude.
I love this image. One of the best descriptions I've heard of mindfulness is that it does allow us to put things down. And I think as responders, with our desire to help others, to really contribute to our communities in pursuit of our passion and our meaning in life, we are far too commonly picking up other people's rocks and putting them in our backpack without realizing it. So those rocks add to our stress, add to our trauma, and unless we have very effective coping mechanisms, the pack gets heavier and heavier and heavier. And this is one of the reasons why mindfulness is so helpful. Mindfulness allows us to put things down. We can recognize, we can care, but we don't feel the need to carry it. In another episode, we talked about a water bottle experiment where you take a rather light water bottle and you hold it out on your arm, but over time it gets heavier and heavier. Things that seem light on their own, if we don't manage them in the moment, continue to accumulate. Mindfulness is an opportunity for us to respect them, to honor them, to appreciate them, but to let them go.
So how many people in this room online have imposter syndrome? Because I do. And why is imposter syndrome something that's incredibly challenging from a stress standpoint? I love this quote, but the idea here basically is stop worrying about what you can and can't accomplish. Build a culture that accepts failure as a methodology to being successful, and go forth and fail. Fail fast, fail forward. But recognize that you're going to make mistakes, you're going to have challenges. You need to be in a culture that understands that. That's humanity. So if you're in an organization that doesn't allow you to fail or doesn't recognize people are going to have mistakes, that's another conversation. But don't limit yourself because you're concerned about what you might and might not be able to accomplish. You can accomplish a lot more than you maybe perceive. And there's a ton of anxiety and strife that's related to what if I have this problem? What if I make a mistake? What if I'm not successful? Go forth. Feel comfortable in the fact there's not anybody that's been successful that hasn't failed many, many, many times along the way.
And again, this speaks to our self-talk. If there's a constant narrative in our head saying you're not good enough, you're an imposter, you're a failure, people are going to find out, your performance is going to suffer. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean be arrogant and just think you can do everything without the appropriate preparation. Just honor and accept that you have been working on your sleep, you have been working on your nutrition, you're working on your stress management, you have put in the time to train to your role, and you are capable. You might fail, but we are who we are, not what we do. Which brings us to acceptance.
Acceptance is understanding that we all make mistakes, as Brandon just put so well, is that failure is part of growing. Some of the most successful people in the world would acknowledge that they were built upon their failures. We are who we are, not what we do. Recognizing that practicing these things, what we say we're going to do, and walking kind of that talk is an important part of being successful in our resiliency. And acceptance is not equal quitting or failing. And that's something we need to recognize, and we have a challenge doing as A-type personalities. It's really hard for us to see it as not as something quitting or failing.
It's important to acknowledge too, and this is something that we can't get away from, but the work that we do, when there are failures, there can be real significant downsides, right? If you're a firefighter or a police officer or in healthcare, failure is synonymous with the bad outcome for other people. So we're not saying go forth and try to fail in those sort of circumstances, but embracing failure, building things that share failure with others so they don't have to make the same mistakes that you did, can elevate your organization. But you got to recognize that there's no organization on the planet that doesn't have failure, and there's all kinds of industries that have become successful, aerospace and medicine, through the acknowledgement and sort of distribution of their failures.
And growing from them, right?
Absolutely.
To the point of acceptance, not equal quitting or failing, is that we learn from those and we grow from those moments and we build something out of them. We don't just let them be that, what we might term as a failure or quitting.
And I love the saying that there are two things that responders hate: change and the way things are. Our culture typically does not encourage us to accept. We are trained to come into situations and to change the outcome. Acceptance many times in our mind is equated with giving up. It's failure, like Craig said. Really being able to revert to the serenity prayer, which sounds trite, but there's a whole lot of wisdom behind it. Give me the ability to accept the things I cannot change. Give me the courage to change the things I can, and give me the wisdom to know the difference. That's really what this is about, is really accepting that sometimes the cards are dealt before we get there and we can't change the outcome, but reframing our metric for success. What did we do well on that call? What did we do that nobody else had the opportunity to? And what can we do better next time? That's really a form of resiliency. Accepting what we've experienced, learning from it, and then moving forward without carrying it.
Okay, so this is the homework portion of this particular lecture. So don't be upset about this, but we would like you to take a screenshot or an image of this and spend some time trying to build these skills. It's really it's important to actually put effort into change. And so it's easy to walk away from things like this. The research says you're going to remember about 7% of what we say, which is probably generous at 1 week. But this is something that you can keep with you over the course of the next year. And it takes about 3 to 5 weeks to build a habit. So pick one of these things and put some concerted effort into it for 3 to 5 weeks and see how it starts to change your life. And then there's 12 of them, so you can spend a year, 3 or 4 weeks at a time, doing one of these things and start making incremental change. Because the important thing about change is this is not something that you're going to walk out of this particular lecture and you're going to have a complete change in the way that you perceive things, but it's incremental and it takes effort. So you've got to sort of look at this stuff, see something that you think might be worthwhile, and start building a habit.
Well, and I love Brandon's point about repetition. People ask us quite frequently, what is the best resiliency practice? And it's the one that you'll do, because it is all about habits. It is all about building patterns. One of the other big questions we get is, what's self-compassion? That sounds really foo-foo. I feel like that's selfish, and it's not. Self-compassion is one of the ways that we can really recharge our own personal internal battery. There's a lot of research that shows around burnout in particular. One of the most effective ways to mitigate or prevent burnout is to practice small acts of compassion towards others and toward ourselves. And acts of compassion towards ourselves don't need to be a 2-week vacation. It can be grabbing that cup of coffee, and instead of rushing to your car or rushing to the next meeting, the next call, the next patient, just taking 2 or 3 minutes to sit down and appreciate it. Smell the aroma, feel the warmth in your hands, taste it. That's an act of self-compassion. Quieting down that negative internal voice, internally acknowledging, hey, I did a good job. That went really well. Awesome, I've been working on that. Stopping to, when you're at the grocery store and in a rush, you see a bunch of daisies that are pretty. Buy them, put them on your kitchen table so you see them on a daily basis. Giving yourself an opportunity to practice that 5-minute breathing practice, or to do a breath work like the physiologic sigh, in a stressful moment. That is self-compassion. It is really, really easy to integrate that into your day. And like we talked about neuroplasticity, when you start making it a habit of doing these things, you will eventually go towards kindness more often than you will towards self-beration or negative thoughts about yourself.
Socrates said, we are what we do repeatedly, therefore excellence is not an act, but a habit. And that says two things. First, you can't just think about how you want to be different. You actually have to put effort into it. And second, once you've done that, made that effort for a sufficient amount of time, you will start to actually become the person that you'd like to be. And so these are opportunities for you to sort of effort and direction and focus to make some change.
Here's lots of suggestions. We've given more detail in the earlier segments of this section. Choose what works for you and implement it. If you find that you're losing the benefit of it over time, change it up, add something else. In fact, it's a good idea to add other practices so you're not dependent upon just the one thing. We hope that you can appreciate that even though these things seem small in their own right, they really are powerful in offsetting the accumulation of stress and trauma. It's how you learn to cope with your operational environment. So bringing it all together, these careers, these jobs are not death sentences. There are some significant occupational challenges, exposures that we may struggle with, but when we choose to rise to the challenge, we can use those as opportunities for growth. This whole segment has been about how you empower yourself to be able to handle these challenges with ease and to live a higher quality life because of it. We train for so many other physical hazards on the job. It's really the mental and emotional ones that get more of us. So this is a way to avoid paying that price for the job. If you have been with us for a while and you completed the assessment at the beginning of the mental health curriculum, we would sure appreciate it if you take a minute or two to complete the assessment again. Again, this is all anonymous. It's just a way for us to measure if people are continuing to show an increase in knowledge from this content and to get your feedback. Are we on track? Are we off track? Are our needs as a community evolving and do we need to hit something else? We really appreciate your time. This also allows us to monitor the downstream impact of the work that we do. As I mentioned in one of our other sessions, we are really proud that we never charge a responder, an agency, a participant for our content, and being able to collect anonymized metrics like this demonstrates our value to donors so we can continue to provide high quality content at no charge. If you are curious about anything we've talked about during this session, we have plenty of citations and references. Please feel free to check those out. If you want to see more content like this, we have a couple of options. One, if you'd like to become a facilitator and teach this content in your agency, we offer 20 to 25 free Train the Trainer events across the country every year. They're hybrid, so you can attend remotely or in person. Everybody who attends gets certified, gets access to all this content and subsequent updates, and is able to teach it in your community. We also have a free ResponderStrong Wellness tool that's available on our site, allclearfoundation.org, or at you.responderstrong.org. Free 24/7, available to responders, healthcare workers, and their families. And if you just want to touch base with us and hear more about what we're doing or give us your feedback or your suggestions, send us an email at team@allclearfoundation.org. We really appreciate your time. We hope you found some benefit in this, and we look forward to connecting with you again in the future. Thanks.